What's up, YouTube? Um, like I said, I'm gonna make multiple videos, multiple topics today. Possibly multiple videos, but definitely talk about different things today on my channel. This theory I'm gonna share today in this video is something that I've talked about before on my channel a lot, from the beginning parts of the channel all the way to the current parts. I've had something to mention that was related to it every video, but I never said very much about this other than a few videos. There was a few videos where I've said a lot about it, but most videos I didn't say a lot about it, is the best way I can describe it. So for this video, I'm just going to talk about the multiverse. And is it compatible with my model of science that I've talked about on my channel? Of course, it's compatible. I just want to say that everything is compatible. I have gone over why everything is compatible and everything is connected, for a long list of reasons. But one of the things that this video is going to do is explain why my current view is that there is a multiverse that we exist in, and there also isn't just necessarily one multiverse. There might be other multiverses as well that exist. I do want to say that whether there's a God or not does not really change that there is a multiverse, in my view. There just has to be a multiverse, just for science and math and the laws of physics to not break down. There has to be a multiverse. The probability mechanics of physics, math, and science pretty much necessitate that there has to be a multiverse, at least one multiverse, and that our universe is a part of it. So our multiverse basically is pretty big. There's many universes in it. There is, I want to say at least, I don't even know, probably over 10 different universes, at least in ours. One reason I want to say that is just from the basic argument that colors, going by the laws of physics, colors proves we're in a multiverse. Other things prove we're in a multiverse, but colors is one dead giveaway that we exist in a multiverse. Reason being, colors, there is no intrinsic properties to colors that, when compared to one another, supersede, or there's any superseding of the other. So they must all be equally likely to have their own universe where they reign supreme. Example of what I mean by that is, well, the color black and the color purple, for example, they are obviously not the same color, but that doesn't mean that they're not intrinsically equal in certain ways. Intrinsic properties, what are they? Well, that's a question that ancient philosophers have long since answered, and religions have long since studied. And, well, intrinsic properties of colors are no different in terms of logic to intrinsic properties of anything else that isn't colors. There are many things that exist that are not colors. There's some things that exist that just are what they are without being colors, yet they still have intrinsic properties. Well, the intrinsic properties of colors are such that, well, they're all colors are fundamentally equal in certain categories, but in other categories they are not fundamentally equal. For example, black and purple are fundamentally equal in terms of being capable of being a color. They are both equally capable of occupying space. They're both equally capable of movement, physical movement, and physical behavior. They're not both equally capable of being the color black, of looking like the color black. They're not both equally capable of looking like the color purple. So as you can see, they're equal in some ways, but also unequal in other ways. No two things can be 100% equal in every way. Well, if colors are intrinsically equal in the properties that I've said, which are categories, of course, then they are obviously, it obviously must be possible that colors are equally likely, equally probable, equally deserving, you could even say, of having their own universe where they reign supreme. In our universe, we look at the color spectrum of dark colors and light colors, and you can see by the studies that have been shown and long since shared in the education system across the world that light colors work a lot different than dark colors do in certain ways. Not in every way, just in certain ways. Light colors, well, light colors are linked to brightness. Brightness is linked to high temperature. The higher the temperature, the more brightness. Dark colors are just the opposite in those ways. They lower temperature, less brightness. So, however, all colors have equal probability of having all the same states of matter. They all have the same states of matter, despite being unequal in certain ways. So yeah, I mean, for that reason, it's pretty obvious that, for that reason, it's pretty obvious that colors are, what we could call, quite deserving of being able to control important outcomes in day-to-day life. For example, the fact that darker colors are linked to lower temperature and the opposite to higher temperature means that, well, darker colors are more favorable to be chosen or be near to for lower temperature things or behavior activities, where it's more preferable to have things be lower temperature or to be closer to lower temperature. Darker colors is better for that. at least in our universe, what I'm saying is that in another universe, it is just the other way around, and lighter colors are linked to lower temperature, and darker colors are linked to higher temperature. Reason being, colors have no intrinsic properties that would prohibit them from being able to reign supreme on either end of the spectrum of temperature. In our universe, the colors that reign supreme on the spectrum of high temperature is bright colors. But in another universe, it's the opposite. It's just as likely that there's a universe where light colors reign supreme in terms of low temperature as it is that there's a universe where they reign supreme in high temperature. Colors in and of themselves don't determine their ability to do those things. It really is just random chance involved with other things that are not of random chance that determines capabilities of colors and other physical things. Colors are just, again, the same in some ways and different in other ways. Well, if that's the case, then it must be true that the colors in question have equal likelihoods of being what I said, and so there must be a multiverse, because there must be a universe where it's the inverse in terms of temperatures when it comes to bright colors and dark colors. No single color or no set of colors have any more of a chance than any other color. Any more or less of a chance than any other color of reigning supreme. And so they all reign supreme. The only thing is, if they all reign supreme and they have an equal chance of reigning supreme, because they're all fundamentally equal, then they're basically all tie or stalemate in terms of being chosen as reigning supreme on those ends of the spectrum of temperature. And so basically you have, as a result, a multiverse, because there's going to be some universes where bright colors are low temperature, and dark colors are high temperature. And so basically, it's for that reason that it must be true that so for that reason, it must obviously be true that there's a multiverse. There's another reason why there's a multiverse, of course, which is that the chances of there being only one universe is lower than the chances of there being more than one universe. One of the reasons for that is colors, for the reasons I went over. But it's not just because of colors. It's also because of other things that exist that are physical that are not colors. There is no favoritism or particular reason why any particular universe that comes about or manifests does the specific way it does in terms of there is, but that doesn't mean that it's the only one that's particular to manifest, or that it's the only kind of combination of physical things that are likely to manifest. Now, of course, when you talk of if there's a God or not, it becomes harder to say how true that is or understand why that would be the case. Because if there's a God, then we have to apply value judgments to the God. Value judgments we apply to the God causes there to be value judgments applied to colors and other physical things that the God has the potential to create as it sees fit. But of course, what I'm describing is none other than saying it's how you characterize the God that you believe in or theorize of. It's how you interpret what a God would be if a God had to exist. And of course, what I'm arguing then to support my theory that there must be a multiverse is that whether there's a God or not, the God is not all-powerful against everything, but the God is all-powerful against some things. The God that does exist, if there was one, I'm saying, can't control the probability, the sheer probability of there being a multiverse instead of one universe. As what I'm saying is that, well, if the God is not all-powerful in the first place, then the God does not really decide if there the decision if there's a multiverse or not is not left up to merely just the God or controlled by just the God. It is determined by more than just the God, to say the least. Because the God alone, although it is all powerful against some things, cannot make itself all powerful against everything. If we look at the probability mechanics of a God, they indicate that if there even is a God, it is not one that completely determines its own existence. It's a God that can't completely determine its own existence, and because of that, it can't give itself omnipotence. It can only give itself weak imitations of omnipotence, and it can, of course, control some things, and is very powerful and is stronger than any other physical thing in the multiverse that it's in, as it is a physical thing, is on top of being a non-physical thing, for the reasons that I have gone over. I have been arguing that God is a hybrid between physical and non-physical, as well as that we are both physical and non-physical. So, as I have been arguing for paradoxes for a long time, and it is all very confusing. But anyway, we are most certainly in a multiverse. And for a long time on my channel, I refuted it, but it took me a while to realize that we are in a multiverse, though. After years of this channel, I finally realized that the chances of us being in multiverse are much higher, because the God is not all powerful, and because of how colors and other forms of matter work. There simply must be a multiverse that we're in, and there might even be multiple multiverses and other multiverses out there. It all comes down to the probability mechanics of just one God. Just one God is honestly really just something that, um, if you think about it, is so paradoxical in terms of explaining its existence that you have to argue that it is not all powerful, and if it's not, it can't really control the likelihood or the probability of something as important as if there is a multiverse or not. Um, so, yeah, I mean, now don't get me wrong. I do believe that a god would rather prefer to create physical things rather than not create physical things. As the pleasantness of the physical ought to be experienced. However, it is obviously still true that if it is true that the physical God did exist and was not all powerful, and the non-physical God is also not all powerful against everything, but is all powerful against some things, then it would want there to be a physical set of things. And so it would likely create a multiverse of said physical things rather than merely just one universe. If it is really true that the reason why a physical god or a god would even create more than one physical thing is because the pleasantness of the physical, if experienced, is so wonderful that it ought to be experienced by more than just one thing. It's so powerful and amazing that it ought to be experienced by more than just one physical thing. The more things that get to experience it, the better it is. And so that is why the god would even create more than one physical thing, because the pleasantness of the physical in and of itself is so great. The more of it, the better. So if that's the case, and of course that's only when the physical is pleasant, as we know that there are forms of physical that are not pleasant. So I'm referring to the pleasant physical things, of course, rather than the contrary. With that said, it must be true that the physical things that exist, they ought to be not taken for granted. Some of them ought to not be taken for granted. And really should be observed more carefully, because I don't believe that people fully understand the origins of them, but which really I think causes a lot of ruining of the pleasant physical things that are already out there, or that have been. But the physical God, if it had the ability to even create a universe, which the God, of course, would, if it did exist, it would be the reason why the universe existed. The God would create a universe and a multiverse. That would be the explanation, and that's it. Now, of course, if that were the case, then the God would, of course, decide to create a multiverse rather than just a universe, because a multiverse would be far more of the good stuff, far more of the good form of physical than just less. So it would just be better to have there be more. So it definitely is true that the God has created the multiverse. However, even if the God was somehow opposed to the idea of a multiverse, the God would still be wrong to not create a multiverse. Also, if there is no God, but there is a multiverse, then it must be true that probability mechanics still apply to said multiverse, because said multiverse is still mathematical, and math implies probability mechanics because there's no probability without math in the first place. Therefore, it must be true that the entire multiverse would exist even if there was no God, simply because the chances would be higher rather than lower. The chances of there being a multiverse are high, with or without a God, simply because if we say that there's no God but a universe does exist, then the chances of there being a single universe with its unique combinations, instead of there being other ones with other unique combinations, is impossible, because every other universe with the other combinations would have an equal likelihood of happening. So there definitely must be a multiverse, whether there's a God or not. Simply because whatever determines if there is even one universe, or if universes even manifest, whether it's a God or not, cannot control the equal chances due to the same intrinsic properties of the colors and the other forms of matter for the reasons I went over. Of course, on top of that, this does just beg the question, though, why does the God even create physical negative things in the first place? Well, why does God allow there to be physical negatives? I have given my theory about why. I've given different theories and explanations for why on my channel for a long time. However, I do believe that my most recent explanation has been incorrect when I had said that it is for some sort of grand incentive, you could call it, a grand incentive where God has these set of abilities and potential to tap into said powers to create each and every thing he can, or to use all of his abilities in his arsenal. If he doesn't use them, it's a waste of power, and that's wrong. Oh yeah, it's wrong. But it's not as serious a wrong, or devastating a wrong, as even creating physical negatives in the first place. Creating physical negatives in the first place is highly devastating. More devastating than what would happen if a God decided to not create any physical negatives at all. We measure the severity of something by how devastating it is in its effects on other physical things within its universe. Well, the amount of devastation brought to physical things that exist within each and every universe, from there being physical negatives within said universes, is far higher than if there were a universe without any physical negatives. There is nothing severely wrong with a God not creating physical negatives. But there is something severely wrong with a God creating physical negatives. We say that the amount of severity of wrong that happens with things comes down to how much suffering happens. It's a perfect measure or indicator. Apply units of measure of how much suffering. How many units of suffering? Well, it all comes down to that, because the only time we ever say there's something wrong, or we say the only way to measure the wrong, the true highest form of wrong, is simply how much suffering. And we say God could have created all kinds of other things that he hasn't, but it wouldn't be it'd be more severely wrong. What would be more severely wrong is the physical suffering that would come from the things created, not prohibiting himself from creating said things for some lack of, for some waste of power or potential. For the value of potential is contingent upon how it's used and what for, not the potential in and of itself. So therefore, it must be true that that it is wrong for God to have created such physical negatives, as it is not better for the God that exists to create physical negatives in the first place. Why did the God that created physical negatives create them in the first place? Because there's something very wrong with the God that exists. I'll tell you what it is. The God that exists is not all-powerful against everything. The God that exists is all-powerful against some things, but not everything. Therefore, there must be some certain things that exist that the God is not all-powerful against, and because of that, because of those things that is not all-powerful against, leads to said God having to create physical negatives, consequentially, that honestly are not worth creating, but are not, well, how do I say it? If they are created, it would be, if they were created, it would be at least of some value, because physical negatives can be used for positive outcomes, and it has been tested and measured. So physical negatives are not completely obsolete, but a world that has physical negatives created into it could never be as good as a world that never had any physical negatives to begin with. So, at least overall, but it doesn't matter very much, because as I've described and gone over, all the physical negatives in our universe and in the multiverse will already be wiped away eventually anyway, for the reasons I've said. But it can never be as good as a universe or multiverse that never even had such unnecessary things in the first place. As the amount of loss coming from there not being physical negatives created is not very serious. It's not as serious as such extremities of things getting torn apart and blown up. So it's pretty clear that no feelings get hurt on God's part or anybody's part if God didn't create physical negatives. But if God does create physical negatives, everybody's feelings get hurt. So which is really worse? I think a world where people's feelings get hurt is a lot worse than a world where people's feelings never got hurt in the first place. As we do say that the only way for a world to even be worse or bad is to have feelings hurt. It's either that or some potential is not tapped into, which is a negative. Just not on the same level of feelings getting hurt. There's a difference. So it's pretty clear that God is not all-powerful, going by that logic. Not everybody necessarily will understand right away what I'm saying, but it's true. And if it's true, then it must also be true that there must be something that existed external to God, even in his non-physical form, that was also non-physical to dictate his actions. It must have been something non-physical or set of non-physical entities, some of which must have been negative and less intelligent than the non-physical God, to force him to have to participate in causing there to be physical negatives rather than just physical positives. If you try to say that what I'm saying can't make sense, then how do you explain the argument I just gave for why it's actually better for there to just be physical positives only? If you believe it's true, then it must be that there are non-physical entities that exist, have eternally existed external to the non-physical God, that were evil. It also must be the case that I have some evidences for it, but before I get to those, I also want to mention something, which is that given everything I've talked about in terms of paradoxes, and how every paradox seemingly happens irregardless of everything prior established, and all the arguments I've given for that being true many times on my channel, it is hardly ironic that what I'm saying could be a possibility, that there are non-physical entities that exist, that have coexisted to the non-physical God eternally, tormenting it into the point of having to create physical negatives rather than just physical positives. Whether having created a multiverse or not, the same thing would happen. So I can only refer you to said arguments about how paradoxes work. The probability mechanics of paradoxes are ridiculously confusing, but if you followed along with what I said, you'll see why it's very likely that there would be non-physical entities that were evil, eternal, and coexisted to the non-physical God. And I would say yeah, I mean, it's basically just that. Yeah, so that's my argument for why there must be a multiverse. And technically it has something to do with what I've talked about, which is there only a non-physical God? Yes, there's only a non-physical God according to popular religions. There's no other non-physical entities that have coexisted with it eternally, other than in concept or paradox. But the funny thing is, there really is, it's really not true, going by everything I've gone over so far in this video. There is clearly non-physical entities that must be involved before there was ever any physical things. There could have only been non-physical things to dictate what little that did exist, and it would have just been non-physical beings that would have more or less not been equal in terms of intelligence, you could say, or IQ. And if you just look at why, if you just beg the question to yourself, why is there even one God in the first place? Well, you'll always get the same two explanations, that there has to be a God to explain what is. So, and because it's limited to only those explanations, we would just have to apply, we would most likely have to apply the same logic to there being other non-physical beings to have always existed. For the reasons I said, because, well, paradoxes come with the price, everything comes with a price, and the fact that even just one non-physical God even is a paradox, for the reasons I've said, highly implies that there would have to be other non-physical entities to coexist with it. One way of looking at it, interesting way I've come up with, is that if we say that everything is completely proportionate in all forms of existence, then there must be a physical thing for every non-physical thing that is equal to it. And so if that's the case, there must also be non-physical, not only non-physical versions of ourselves, which I have argued for a while on this channel, but also there must be non-physical, what do you call it? Well, yeah, I mean, there just have to be non-physical forms of ourselves. And that just implies that most likely creation itself is the evil non-physical that has eternally coexisted with non-physical God and caused it to have to create physical evils. For whatever reason, when there was a God eternally, it just had its intrinsic properties of being extremely smart and powerful. There was no reason or cause of it having been like that. It just was like that. We can say the same logic applies to any other non-physical beings. They would just have their properties and just be what they are. They would just be lesser than the God in those ways. Nothing to cause it, it's just what they would be. And, well, I mean, that's pretty much it. I mean, whatever necessitates that there is a God or good things is equally likely to just necessitate that there must be the contrary. So it makes sense for why there would have to be eternal evil rather than just eternal good, which would be an eternal God good. There had to be some sort of eternal evils following that logic. It's almost as if on the non-physical plane, as long as it can happen, it just will happen. And somehow, just because there can be a God, a non-physical God, somehow that just means there must be, because of how the non-physical works. So, it follows the same logic that just because there can be an evil non-physical that's eternal, there must be. And this is all, of course, consistent with the paradoxes I've taught on my channel, talked about in great detail. So, that's what I have to say for this video. There's nothing left to cover in this video that's really controversial. I hope you enjoyed. Bye.